The fox's eyes locked onto Jason's, and for a heartbeat, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sudden desperate yip, she bolted, leading him to a tiny, trapped kit, bloodied and gasping. But there was something else, something human, buried under the rocks. What was it? What happened next would shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jason hesitated for only a second more, then adjusted his hat, gripped his radio, and stepped off the trail, boots crunching through gravel and brittle mesquite. Regulations advised against pursuing wildlife. It could disrupt their behavior or lead to dangerous encounters. But protocol was a distant echo in his mind now, drowned out by a gut-deep conviction. This wasn't ordinary. The fox darted ahead, weaving through creosote and Joshua trees with a grace born of desperation. Every few dozen yards, she paused, glancing back to ensure he followed, then darted on. Jason followed, weaving between sandstone outcrops and prickly pear clusters, heat radiating off the ground in shimmering waves. Time seemed to stretch, minutes, maybe more, until the land dipped into a shallow arroyo, half choked with tumbleweed and fractured rock. That's when he heard it, a faint, high-pitched whimper, almost too soft to register above the hum of insects and the dry rustle of wind. Jason froze, scanning the arroyo. The fox had stopped entirely now, tail low, ears flat, her chest heaving. She turned her head toward the source of the sound and sat down, as if to say, "Here." Jason scrambled down the embankment, heart pounding. The ground was cracked and uneven, but he moved quickly, instinct leading him to a shaded crevice beneath a slab of collapsed rock. There, nearly hidden by the tumble of debris, lay 3 kits, scarcely larger than his hand, their fur matted, eyes crusted, ribs pressing sharply through their skin. One barely moved, another mewled weakly. A collapsed den, maybe, destabilized by a recent flash flood. He could see where the earth had given way, forming a sinkhole. The mother must have tried to dig them out and failed. Alone, she'd had no hope. Jason's throat tightened. Slowly he dropped to one knee, speaking softly. "Easy. I've got you." The fox didn't retreat. She stood her ground, panting, her eyes locked on his with a quiet intensity that pierced through species and language. Not fear, not panic. Trust. He radioed for assistance, voice tight, requesting an emergency wildlife extraction. He didn't know how long the kits had been trapped. Hours, maybe a day. Time was razor thin. As he waited, he dripped water from his canteen onto a clean cloth and dabbed it gently along one of the kit's mouths. Its tongue flicked at the moisture. The mother sat silent above them, unmoving, vigilant, a sentinel of something deeper than instinct, something ancient and immeasurable. Jason holstered his radio and took a slow, steadying breath. The wash was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Sand crunched under his boots as he slid into the gap, brushing past twisted roots and sun-scorched stone. Every movement echoed in the close space, a whisper of grit, a soft creak of his gear. The kit's shallow breaths were labored, rasping under the fractured slab like the ticking of a clock winding down. The slab wasn't enormous, but it was angled poorly, precarious and resting against the wash wall in such a way that one wrong move might bring it down entirely. Jason examined it, running calloused fingers along the edges, judging weight, balance. He'd done wilderness extractions before, lost hikers, trapped climbers, but never this small, never this delicate. The fox edged closer, her body trembling with tension, eyes darting between him and the rock. She let out a soft, broken chuff. It wasn't a command, it wasn't a cry, it was something older. He slid his pack off slowly, careful not to shift the unstable shale, and pulled out a compact emergency jack, a slim tool meant for wedging boulders during rockslide rescues. He wedged it into the gap, turning the crank millimeter by millimeter. The stone groaned, dry and brittle. Jason gritted his teeth. He could feel it. One wrong twist and the slab would shear clean in half, but the kit beneath it wasn't moving anymore. Come on," he muttered. A bead of sweat dropped from his chin, darkening the dust near the fox's paw. Then an inch. Enough. Jason slipped his gloved hand beneath the stone and curled his fingers gently around the kit's fragile torso. Its fur was hot, soaked through with blood and heat. The paw twitched. Still alive, barely. He pulled it free and staggered backward, cradling the tiny body to his chest. The jack slipped, and the rock clapped down into the wash with a deafening crack. But it was too late to matter. The kit was out. He stepped into the open sunlight, his shadow long against the sand. The mother fox followed, her steps measured, her eyes fixed on the bundle in his arms. Not wild now, not tame either. Something in between. He knelt and laid the kit on a clean cloth. The mother crept forward, nose twitching, and gently licked the kit's ear. Jason didn't move. The desert didn't breathe. It was then, in the silence, that he noticed something strange, half buried beneath the shale. Not fur, not bone. Fabric, weathered, sun-bleached, man-made. And it didn't belong here. They moved fast, Jason cradling the kit like spun glass, Mariah clearing the narrow exit ahead. The heat was climbing toward Tendergast, but neither ranger felt it anymore. Adrenaline had burned off the edges of pain and heat, leaving only instinct, urgency, and the sharp throb of disbelief. Once they reached the rover, Jason climbed into the back, while Mariah revved the engine and tore across the hardpan, tires skimming over sun-cracked earth. Jason kept one hand pressed gently against the kit's rib cage, counting the fragile rise and fall of her breath. The drive to the wildlife rehab outpost wasn't long, but it felt like crossing a continent. Every jolt in the road, every vibration in the frame, echoed through Jason's spine like a threat. The pup was too light, too still. Even the wind against her body seemed too much. "Still breathing," he murmured, mostly to himself. Mariah didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the horizon, knuckles white against the wheel. But under the urgency was something neither of them spoke aloud yet: the fabric. Jason had spotted it just before pulling the kit out, caught beneath the same rock, buried so deep in dust and time it had nearly fused with the earth. A strip of canvas, unmistakably human-made. It wasn't Park Service issue, wasn't military. Looked older, sun-bleached and frayed, as if it had been sitting under that stone for years, maybe decades. Back at the site, Mariah had seen it too. Just a flash of color in a world of rust and sand, but enough to pull them both out of the moment. "What the hell was that doing out there?" she'd whispered. Jason didn't answer. He still hadn't. Now, holding the half-conscious kit wrapped in sterile cloth, Jason stared out the window, in his mind running loops through every hiker report he'd ever filed, every missing person log, every desert legend passed in ranger bunkhouses. The mother fox had come for help, not food, not escape. Help. She had led them not just to her pup, but to something else. Jason didn't believe in omens, didn't trust them. But as the outpost came into view, sun glinting off the solar panels, he realized his hands were shaking. Not from fear, from knowing something had just changed, and they were already in deeper than they could see. Jason sat on the edge of the rehab outpost's weathered porch, a cup of lukewarm coffee cooling in his hands. Ash was tucked into her corner of the wildlife recovery room, a bundle of fragile hope wrapped in gauze and a quiet hum of machinery. The sterile smell of the clinic mixed with the earthy scent of the desert drifting through the screen door. It was a blend of both worlds, wild and human, caught in the space where they collided, a space he hadn't expected to be standing in. He hadn't been able to shake the feeling since that day, the quiet touch of the mother fox's paw against his boot. It had been a moment so soft, so deliberate, that it made everything around him feel smaller, more fragile. Her gaze had been steady, unwavering, as if she understood him, as if she knew she could trust him, even in the vast, empty landscape of the Mojave. Trust. It didn't make sense. A wild animal driven by nothing more than instinct didn't make decisions like that, did it? But he'd seen it, the way her eyes locked onto his with a kind of unspoken plea, the way she had waited, patiently, for him to follow. She had known something he hadn't, something he couldn't explain. The others had talked in hushed voices. Wildlife experts, biologists, they'd called it an anomaly, a fluke. But Jason didn't buy it. There was too much certainty in the way she had led him to the kit. Too much intent. A wild fox didn't act like that, didn't break from its nature unless it had reason. And the only reason he could think of was desperation. It was more than just the act of seeking help. It was a message, a call across species, across boundaries that had reverberated into the desert's quiet pulse. Jason had understood it then as he lay on the ground, cradling the kit in his arms. And maybe, just maybe, the fox had understood it too. This was no ordinary rescue. It was a testament, a reminder of something primal, something ancient, that still pulsed beneath the surface of the modern world. Trust, even between the most unlikely of beings. 2 weeks had passed since that moment, and Ash was slowly recovering, her leg healing under careful treatment, her body gaining strength. The wildlife team was cautiously optimistic, but Jason's thoughts always wandered back to that day, back to the mother. The motion-triggered camera footage had arrived like a whisper through the wind, quiet, unannounced, but undeniable. The mother fox had returned to the site. She had stood still, staring into the lens as if she was marking something, a silent acknowledgement of what had transpired. And then, like the desert itself, she had vanished. Jason didn't need words to understand. She had said everything. Her presence had been the answer, the final piece to a puzzle that still had no name. The boundary between them, human and wild, had been erased in that single, unspoken moment of connection. And somehow, in the vastness of the desert, amidst the infinite silence of nature, that was enough.